America in 1938 felt restless. The Great Depression still gripped the nation. Jobs were scarce. Money was tight. People looked for hope. They also looked for escape. News from Europe sounded bad. Hitler was on the rise. War felt like it could come any day. People worried about their future. They worried about the world. Radio was a big deal then. It was the main way people got news. It was how they got entertainment. Families gathered around their radio sets at night. They listened to music, they listened to dramas, they listened to comedy shows. Radio felt intimate. It felt reliable. The voices came right into your living room. They felt like friends. People trusted what they heard on the radio. Orson Welles was a young man then. He was brilliant. He was ambitious. He was a theater prodigy. He directed plays. He acted in them. He was a big name in New York. He had a group called the Mercury Theater. They were known for being clever. They were known for being experimental. They liked to try new things. In 1937, Welles got a radio show. It was called the Mercury Theater on the Air. It was a weekly drama. They adapted classic books for radio. They did Dracula. They did Treasure Island. The show was good, but it wasn't a huge hit yet. It didn't have a sponsor. Welles wanted to make a splash. He wanted people to notice. It was October 1938. Halloween was coming. The Mercury Theater staff met. They talked about what to do for the next show. They needed something dramatic, something to grab attention. Someone suggested War of the Worlds. It was an old science fiction book. H.G. Wells wrote it. It was about Martians invading Earth. The idea seemed good, but the book was a bit dated. It needed an update. Wells and his team thought about how to make it modern. How to make it exciting. They decided to change the setting. They moved the invasion to America. They put it in New Jersey. Grover's Mill, New Jersey became the landing site. The writers, particularly Howard Koch, worked on the script. They thought about how news was delivered. They thought about how quickly things could change. They decided to present the story like a series of news bulletins, like a breaking news report. This was a common format on radio for big events. People would hear music, then an announcer would break in. They would give an update, then maybe go back to music. This style was very familiar to listeners. It made things feel urgent, it made things feel real. They planned the show carefully. It would start with an introduction. It would say it was a play. Then there would be music. Had a dance band. But then it would be interrupted, a reporter would break in, he would talk about strange explosions on Mars. Later, more interruptions, reports of something landing in New Jersey, a cylinder, and aliens coming out, destruction. It would all sound very believable. The actors rehearsed. They practiced sounding frantic, they practiced sounding scared. The sound effects team worked hard. They made sounds for the Martian machines, they made sounds for crowds, they made sounds for explosions. They made it all very real. Wells wanted the show to be powerful. He wanted it to be convincing. He wanted to trick people just a little bit. He wanted to show how powerful radio could be. He didn't want to cause a panic. He just wanted to make great drama. He thought people would know it was a play. He thought they would listen from the start. They would hear the introduction. They would understand it was fiction. But he was wrong. Many people didn't listen from the start. Many people tuned in late. They didn't hear the warning. They heard only the news reports. They heard the panic in the voices. That they heard the explosions. They believed it was real. The stage was set. Sunday, October 30th, 1938. Millions of radios hummed across America. Most people were listening to a popular comedy show, The Chase and Sanborn Hour, with ventriloquist Edgar Bergen. It was on another station. But some people would switch channels. Some would tune in late. And some would hear something they could not explain. The world was about to change for a night. The atmosphere of the time was important. People lived with constant anxiety. The depression had lasted years. It had worn people down. They were tired, they were stressed, they were looking for something to believe in. Or something to fear. The idea of something big happening, something catastrophic, wasn't entirely unbelievable. The world felt fragile. The news from Europe sounded like a prelude to disaster. People were already on edge. They were more receptive to scary news, even if it sounded unbelievable. The stage was truly set for a unique event. This broadcast was more than just a play. It tapped into deeper fears. It played on the public's readiness for bad news. It used the trusted voice of radio. It made a perfect storm. The Mercury Theater team worked hard. They had no idea what they were about to unleash. They were just making a show. They were doing their job. They wanted to entertain. They wanted to impress. Wells was a showman. He wanted a big reaction. He got one. And bigger than anyone could have imagined. The broadcast was scheduled for 8 p.m. Eastern Time. The whole country was listening. Or at least A lot of it was. And a lot of those listeners would soon be very, very scared. They didn't know it was a story. They thought it was happening right now. They thought it was happening to them. The script was clever. It built slowly. It started with small news items. Then it got bigger. The voice of a professor. The voice of a reporter. The descriptions grew more vivid. More terrifying. It was designed to pull you in. It was designed to make you believe. And it worked. Maybe too well. The decisions made that week were simple ones. Choose a story. Would adapt it, make it sound real. These decisions would echo for years. They would become a legendary moment in radio history. But first, they would cause a nationwide scare, and a lot of fear in a small New Jersey town. The cast and crew wrapped up their rehearsals. They were ready. The clock ticked towards 8 p.m. The lights in the studio dimmed, the microphone came alive, and the story began. A story that would, for a short time, become real to many. A story that would show the true power of radio and the powerful vulnerability of people. The mood in the studio was electric. Wells was in charge. He directed every pause, every inflection. He knew how to build suspense. He knew how to create drama. He had a vision, and that vision was about to play out on a national stage, a stage made of airwaves. A stage that reached into millions of homes. He wanted to make a statement. He wanted to challenge what radio could do. He succeeded, but not in the way he planned. It was Sunday, October 30th, 1938. The evening was quiet. Most radios were tuned to CBS, not for the Mercury Theater on the air, but for the popular Edgar Bergen show on NBC. Many people listened to Bergen's comedy. They laughed at his jokes. Then, during a music break, some listeners would switch stations. They would scan for something else. That's when they might land on CBS. The broadcast started at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. The announcer spoke clearly. The Columbia Broadcasting System and its affiliated stations present Orson Welles and the Mercury Theater on the air in The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. This was the official disclaimer. It said it was a play, but many people missed it. They were still on NBC then. Music started. A simple dance band. Ramon Raquello and his orchestra. It played soft tunes. It sounded normal, but soon the music stopped. An announcer broke in. His voice was serious. He said, "Ladies and gentlemen, we interrupt our program of dance music to bring you a special news bulletin." This was the first hint of something unusual. This was a familiar pattern for breaking news. The announcer said there were strange flashes on Mars. Professor Farrell of the Mount Jennings Observatory was quoted. He said they were likely gas eruptions. It sounded like a science report. It sounded like real news. The music came back on, but then it was interrupted again. More reports came in. From observatories, they described huge green explosions on Mars. This was unusual. But still, it sounded like science news. The music kept trying to play, but it kept getting cut off. The interruptions became more frequent, more urgent. Then came the report that changed everything. A reporter named Carl Phillips spoke. He was on the scene in Grover's Mill, New Jersey. He described a meteor. It had crashed on a farm. He said he was there. He described the smell. The smoke. The fear in his voice was clear. He sounded genuinely shocked. People listened. They heard the sounds, the wind, the commotion. The reporter's voice rose in excitement. Then a metallic cylinder was described. It was huge. It was on the ground. People gathered around it. They were curious. They were scared. Phillips kept talking. He described the cylinder opening. A creature emerged, something wriggling out of the shadow like a gray snake. He described its eyes. 2 great luminous discs. Its mouth, V-shaped and quivering. The sounds became more intense. A strange hissing sound. Then a heat ray fired. People screamed. Phillips shouted into the microphone. Good heavens, something's wriggling out of the shadow like a gray snake. Now another one, and another one. They're charging. They're coming this way. The heat ray. It's burning. It's burning. Ah! Then silence, then static. Then a new voice. An announcer. His voice was strained. He reported the death of Carl Phillips and other people. He spoke about an emergency. Martial law. This was the moment the panic truly began for many. The reporter had been there. He had been killed. This felt too real to be fake. The broadcast continued. More reporters joined in. From different locations, they described more Martian cylinders landing. One in Buffalo. One in St. Louis. The invasion was spreading. The Martians had powerful machines and tripods. They walked over cities. They destroyed everything. People were dying. Gas attacks. Smoke filled the air. A Secretary of the Interior spoke. His voice was calm, but grave. He called for calm. He spoke about defending the nation. This added to the realism. It sounded like an official government response. This was what people expected to hear in a crisis. The play moved fast. There was no time to think. One disaster followed another. New York City was attacked. People tried to evacuate. They were trying to escape. The sounds were terrifying. Explosions, screams, warplanes. The Martians were unstoppable. They were winning. The world was ending. Many people who tuned in late missed the start. They missed the name of the show. They missed the disclaimer. They just heard these urgent, shocking reports. They heard the panic. They heard the sound effects. They believed it was happening. Right now, the broadcast lasted about an hour. The first 40 minutes were presented as news bulletins, interruptions, live reports. And then the final 20 minutes switched to a more traditional radio drama format. A professor described the aftermath. He spoke about how humans fought back, and eventually how the Martians died. Not from human weapons, but from Earth's bacteria. The story ended. But for many, the damage was done. The panic had already spread. The show had been too convincing. The timing had been too perfect. The fears of the time had been too great. People didn't wait for the end. They didn't wait for the aliens to die. They just heard the start. They heard the invasion. They heard the destruction, and they acted on it. Orson Welles' voice finally came back on. He was calm. He said, "This is Orson Welles, ladies and gentlemen, speaking to you to assure you that the War of the Worlds has no further significance than as the holiday offering of the Mercury Theater on the air." He sounded apologetic, but it was too late. The show had already become a part of history. It had become a legend. It had caused a real panic, a very real panic in New Jersey and beyond. The brilliance of the broadcast was in its execution. The actors delivered their lines with urgency. The sound engineers created a believable soundscape of chaos. The scriptwriters structured it perfectly to build suspense. It tapped into the public's trust in radio. It used the format of breaking news. And it happened at a time when the world was already nervous. All these elements combined to make a truly unforgettable, and for some, terrifying experience. The show ended, but the story of the panic was just beginning. The radio broadcast ended. But the chaos had just begun for many. As soon as those news reports of Martians landing in Grover's Mill, New Jersey, hit the airwaves, people reacted. And they reacted fast. Remember, many people tuned in late. They didn't hear Orson Welles say it was a play. They just heard the urgent voices, the screams, the explosions. They heard that Carl Phillips, the reporter, had been killed. This was not a story. This was real. In New Jersey, especially near Grover's Mill, people became terrified. They lived close to where the meteor supposedly landed. They believed their town was under attack. Families rushed out of their homes. They got into their cars, they drove away, they wanted to escape the Martians. They wanted to get to safety. Phone lines became jammed. People called their relatives. They warned them. They told them to leave. They called the police. They reported the invasion. They asked for help. They asked what to do. The police switchboards lit up. Officers didn't know what to tell them. They hadn't heard the broadcast, or they didn't believe it, but the callers sounded genuinely scared. People called newspapers. They asked for confirmation. Is it true? They asked. Are the Martians really here? They called radio stations too. They demanded to know what was happening. They wanted more information. The CBS station in New York City was flooded with calls. People were crying. People were shouting. In Newark, New Jersey, a woman ran into a church. She screamed that the world was ending. She said Martians were attacking. People in the church started to pray. Some fainted. In other places, people put wet towels over their faces. They thought it would protect them from the Martian gas. Some even tried to commit suicide. They thought it was better than facing the aliens. The panic wasn't just in New Jersey. It spread across the country. In Washington state, a man drove his family into the mountains. He thought they would be safe there. In Indiana, people ran from their homes. They grabbed their children. They packed their cars. They thought the Martians were coming for them. The broadcast mentioned specific locations. Grover's Mill, West Windsor. These real places became points of immense fear. Residents in those areas truly thought they were ground zero for an alien invasion. Imagine hearing your town named on the radio as the site of a Martian landing. Imagine hearing a reporter die on air just miles from your house. The fear was immense. It was immediate. People didn't just listen. They looked out their windows. They saw car lights. They saw smoke from distant fires. It confirmed their fears. They thought these were Martian heat rays or Martian machines moving through the night. It was just everyday life. Car lights, fog. But in their panicked minds, it became proof. The broadcast had mentioned the Martians were using gas. People thought they would suffocate. They sealed their windows, they blocked their doors, they did anything they could to protect themselves. They thought they were literally fighting for their lives. The police and fire departments were overwhelmed. They couldn't keep up with the calls. They tried to tell people it was a radio play, but people didn't believe them, or they couldn't hear them, or they just kept running. The sheer number of calls made it hard to control the situation. Newspaper offices saw crowds gather outside. People demanded news, they wanted to know the truth, they wanted to know if they were safe. Reporters had to scramble. They had to figure out what was happening. They had to calm people down. It wasn't just individual homes, communities were affected, towns were in an uproar. Roads became jammed with cars trying to flee. People left everything behind, their homes, their possessions. They thought they were abandoning a dying world. The panic lasted for several hours. Even after the broadcast ended, even after Orson Welles apologized, the fear didn't just disappear. It took time for the truth to sink in. It took time for the confusion to clear. People had been genuinely terrified. They had been convinced. The events of that night showed how powerful radio was. It showed how much people trusted it. It also showed how vulnerable people were to fear. Especially in uncertain times, the country was already on edge. The broadcast simply pushed them over the edge. It was a night of mass hysteria, a night when fiction became fact for millions, a night when a simple radio play caused real-world panic. The images of people fleeing, crying, praying, calling for help are a stark reminder of the power of media and the ease with which fear can spread. The panic spread like wildfire. It started in New Jersey, but it quickly enveloped the entire nation. It was a moment America would never forget. A moment that showed the raw power of sound and the fragile state of human belief. The broadcast ended. Orson Welles came on the air. He explained it was a Halloween joke. It's a play. But the damage was done. The phone lines at CBS were completely jammed. Police stations were overwhelmed. Our hospitals reported people admitted for shock. The public was angry, and many felt foolish. The next day, headlines screamed, "Fake radio war stirs terror. Wells's War of Worlds terrifies nation." Newspapers were full of stories. Stories of people fleeing their homes. Stories of jammed roads. Stories of people in distress. The public reaction was huge. Orson Welles held a press conference. He was apologetic. He said he never meant to cause panic. He said he was just putting on a show. He said he was surprised by the reaction. He seemed genuinely shocked by the extent of the fear. He had included disclaimers at the start. He thought that was enough, but it wasn't enough. The Federal Communications Commission, or FCC, got involved. They were the government body that regulated radio. They launched an investigation. They wanted to know why this happened. They wanted to know if rules had been broken. There was talk of shutting down the Mercury Theater. There was talk of new regulations for radio. Many people were furious with Welles. They thought he was irresponsible. They thought he was reckless. Some demanded he be arrested. Others just wanted to scold him. But many also felt foolish. They had believed it. They had panicked. They felt tricked. Why did this broadcast cause such a strong reaction? There are several reasons. First, the power of radio. In 1938, radio was the most trusted medium. It was new. It was immediate. News came from the radio. Entertainment came from the radio. People believed what they heard. It felt like a direct link to the world and to authority. Second, the format of the broadcast. It was presented as news bulletins, not a traditional play. The interruptions of music, the on-the-scene reporters, the official sounding voices. It all added to the realism. People were used to real news being delivered this way. It made it hard to tell the difference. Third, tuning in late. Many people missed the opening disclaimer. They were listening to other shows. They switched channels during a commercial break. Or they just happened to tune in partway through. They heard the panic. They heard the reports of invasion. They had no context. They assumed it was real. Fourth, the context of the times. America was nervous. The Great Depression had made life hard. People were stressed. The war in Europe seemed imminent. Hitler's rise was alarming. There was a general feeling of unease. People were already on edge. They were ready for bad news. They were ready for something terrible to happen. An alien invasion, while fantastical, didn't seem entirely impossible in a world that felt like it was spinning out of control. Fifth, group psychology and credulity. When people hear others are panicking, they can panic too. If their neighbors are fleeing, they might flee. If friends are calling concerned, they become concerned. Fear is contagious, and people can be surprisingly credulous when they are scared. They want to believe the worst. It's a survival instinct. Sixth, sound effects and acting. The Mercury Theater was excellent. The actors sounded truly scared. The sound effects were incredibly realistic. The Martians' heat ray, the chaos, the screams. It was all very convincing. It played on the imagination. Wells claimed he was just trying to create a powerful drama. He wanted to push the boundaries of radio. He wanted to show what was possible. He succeeded beyond his wildest dreams, but the cost was widespread public fear. The investigation by the FCC eventually cleared Wells and CBS. There were no charges. But CBS promised to review its policies. They promised to be more careful. They said they would clearly label all dramas, especially those that mimicked news broadcasts. The War of the Worlds broadcast became a landmark event. It showed the immense power of radio. It showed the public's trust, and it showed the potential for that trust to be exploited, even by accident. It raised questions about media responsibility, questions about how to inform the public without causing undue alarm. These questions still matter today. Wells's reputation was changed forever. Some saw him as a genius. Others saw him as a reckless showman. But everyone remembered the night the Martians invaded New Jersey. And the entire country panicked. It was a powerful lesson for everyone, for broadcasters, for the public, about the fine line between entertainment and reality and how easily that line can be blurred. Especially when people are afraid, the panic taught a clear lesson: words delivered with authority can have immense, unexpected power. The War of the Worlds broadcast was a single event, but its impact lasted for decades. It changed how radio worked. It changed how people thought about media, and it secured Orson Welles' place in history. One of the first big changes was in broadcasting regulations. The FCC, after its investigation, pushed for stricter rules. And radio stations had to be more careful. They had to clearly identify dramas as fiction, especially if they sounded like news. They had to avoid formats that could confuse listeners. Broadcasters became more aware of their responsibility. They learned that their words had real power, and that power could cause real harm, even unintentionally. This event helped shape the ethical guidelines for news reporting and dramatic programming. It made broadcasters think twice about how they presented information. The event also highlighted the power of mass media. Before 1938, many people understood radio's reach, but this broadcast showed its ability to cause mass hysteria. It demonstrated how easily fear could spread through the airwaves. This lesson wasn't lost on others. Governments, advertisers, they all saw the power of radio to influence public opinion. For better or worse, it showed the immense psychological effect that a well-crafted message could have on a large population. For Orson Welles, the broadcast made him famous or infamous. He became a household name. This event helped launch his career in Hollywood. He went on to direct Citizen Kane, often called one of the greatest films ever made. The War of the Worlds showed his genius for creating drama. It showed his ability to captivate an audience. Even if it was by accident, it proved he was a master storyteller. It gave him a reputation for being bold and experimental. That reputation followed him throughout his life. The story itself, the Martian invasion, became a part of pop culture. It proved that science fiction could be truly terrifying. It inspired countless other stories. Movies, TV shows, books. Many of them explored the idea of alien invasion, or the power of fear, or the dangers of misinformation. The image of Martians attacking Earth became iconic. The event also served as an early example of what we now call fake news, or misinformation. It showed how easily false information could spread. It showed how people could believe something untrue, especially when it came from a trusted source, and how that belief could lead to real-world consequences. In today's world, with social media and constant news cycles, this lesson is more important than ever. The War of the Worlds was a pre-internet wake-up call about the dangers of unchecked information. It taught us about human psychology. People are vulnerable to fear, especially when they are already stressed or anxious. The context of the Great Depression and the looming war in Europe was key. It showed how quickly people could lose their critical thinking skills when they believed their lives were in danger. It showed how powerful the herd mentality can be. The Panic of 1938 remains a cautionary tale. It's a story that is still told in media studies classes. It's talked about when discussing the ethics of journalism. It's brought up when people debate the power of new technologies. It reminds us to be critical consumers of information. It reminds us to question what we hear and see. The small New Jersey town of Grover's Mill also got its moment in history. It became synonymous with the broadcast. People still visit the area. They look for signs of the fictional landing. The town became famous for something that never actually happened there. In summary, the War of the Worlds broadcast was more than just a radio play. It was a cultural earthquake. It reshaped broadcasting standards. It launched a career. It became a legend, and it offered profound lessons about media, fear, and human nature. Lessons that still resonate deeply in our complex, information-saturated world today. The panic was real, the lessons are lasting, and the story continues to be a powerful reminder of how easily our perceptions can be manipulated, and how important it is to be thoughtful about the information we consume. It showed that even a simple story, well told, can have an extraordinary, unforeseen impact. The sounds of that Sunday night echoed far beyond the radio waves. They shaped the future.